and welcome to Fitter and Faster. My name is Emma Kate Lidberry, your host and managing editor here at Triathlete Magazine. Each month on Fitter and Faster, we tackle one triathlon training topic in depth, giving you everything you need to know. This month, we're focusing on running, and we'll be talking about run training, technique, injuries, gear, and plenty more. Now, fall or winter is often a great time for triathletes to tackle a run-specific training block. Maybe running is your relative weakness and you want to build volume, durability, and strength, or maybe you just live somewhere where it's harder to get out on the bike at this time of year, so it makes it a great time to focus on running. Either way, we've got a lot of info packed into this show to help you cover some fun running miles in the months ahead. In this show, we'll be chatting with run coach David Roach, who works with runners of all abilities, from pros to newbies and everyone in between. He has some really fascinating advice and insights on how to best approach your run training in a truly smart, fun, and intelligent way. More on him in a bit. And of course, it wouldn't be Fitter and Faster without our Gear Up section, so we'll have our executive editor and gear guru Chris Foster joining us later in the show to talk about some of his favourite running gear and gadgets. And be warned, Chris is a serious runner and a run geek, so if you're keen to learn more about run training and the tech that goes with it, then he is definitely the dude to tune into. More from us after this short break. The Velocity Cycling app knows that all of your training inside is to be better outside. And if your indoor training is only focused on getting stronger, then you're missing the main goal, which is getting faster. Becoming faster is a skill you can and should be training during your indoor sessions by focusing on key contributors to speed, like body position, effective power transfer, gearing efficiency, and drag reduction. Velocity will help you to get faster. In order to get you to faster, Velocity is grounded in science with expert instructors who deliver engaging workouts that make you a better cyclist. Science-driven data delivers insights to develop power, skill, and speed while competing with friends to push yourself to your limits. Not only does Velocity focus on your unique physiology to train specific energy systems to meet your goals, but it also makes you a better, faster cyclist. To combat the boredom and loneliness of training in your pain cave, Velocity streams live instructors to lead your rides with the why behind the work, as well as to let you connect with friends and like-minded riders through live video to motivate and inspire you. An added bonus is you can see your friends' real-time data, which helps fuel friendly competition and fun through the mini competitions within each workout. If you can't make a live ride, then there are on-demand and on-call replays of all the rides, so you can do them when it works best for you. With Velocity, better starts inside, so you can get to faster. David Roach is a run coach who works with runners of all abilities through his coaching company, Some Work, All Play. With his wife and fellow coach, Megan, he hosts the Some Work, All Play podcast and wrote the book, The Happy Runner. He also writes for Trail Runner magazine. He's been coaching for 8 years and running for the last 15, ever since he quit football back in college. And whilst he says he's definitely a trail runner at heart, his favourite race to enter is a Trail 50k, he most definitely knows his stuff when it comes to training and racing for road, track, or trail. I was seriously inspired and fascinated by our chat here. David is one of those rare coaches who blends deep scientific knowledge with an emotionally intelligent approach. He talks us through a typical run week for some of his athletes at this time of year and some of the things to focus on now if you want to pop out into 2022 as a stronger, smarter runner. Okay, that's enough from me. You can find out all about it for yourself in our chat here with David. David, thank you so much for joining us. It is a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to chat with you. And such a cool audience to reach. Usually I'm talking almost exclusively to runners, trail runners, ultra runners. And I'm a huge fan of triathlon and cycling in a little bit as a coach, but also just as a fan of the sport. So it's a great opportunity and I appreciate it so much.
Yes, us triathletes, we're a bit of a different breed. We're jack of all trades, masters of none, and never really quite know which box to put ourselves in. So we find ourselves kind of all over the place. And when it comes to running, it's really I always find it really fascinating to speak to a what I would call a pure run coach, because you obviously have like you said, you have an appreciation of triathlon and multisport, but you are also coming at it with a very different perspective than we do when we're training for all three sports. So and obviously in the time of year we're at, for pretty much in the Northern Hemisphere anyway, I say quote unquote, in a normal year, we would be coming to this is typically like the time where triathletes are resting, recovering from a season of racing, And for a lot of triathletes, they take maybe 2 or 4 weeks off. And then it's the time of year when everybody seems to get inspired, or a lot of people seem to get inspired about running. Whether it's their relative weakness and they want to make some really big gains, or whether it's just fun to hit the trails because you've been doing very specific sessions all year. And so with that in mind, with like this sort of off season and this time of year in mind, the first question I had for you was really how you advise your runners and you as a coach, how you advise people approach the off season from a running point of view.
That amazing question. And I think what the triathletes are experiencing that you mentioned is a really salient point, because running is an incredible opportunity, not just to improve run, but also bike and overall aerobic development in a way that is a massive bang for buck. Like I know triathletes often work in the hours per week framework, but an hour spent running is worth so much from an aerobic growth point of view. A story that I think is really illustrative on this point is an athlete on the team named Tabor Scholl, who is a top runner. She's an absolute beast, can do it all. But when she got an injury in running, off of just bike commuting, she hopped into the Mount Evans Ascent bike race, which always has a stacked pro field, and did the second fastest time ever.
Whoa.
Stunning time. And that's not to say that bike-specific training isn't essential and indispensable. It's just to say running goes more towards biking than biking will go towards running. And so as you're going towards off-season, running is an amazing opportunity, not just to improve your run, which can happen immediately, and I'll talk about that in a sec, but to improve that leg too. And, have some crossover with swimming, though. As a type of person that sinks very readily, I am not particularly the person to speak on that subject. So
I will probably get shot down for saying this, but I would say I'd hesitate to say it maybe, but a lot of runners do a lot of pure runners do tend to sink when they get in the pool. Not all of them, but a lot of runners do tend to struggle with when they come into swimming. Not so much now like the younger generations of triathletes coming in, they're bred as like they come in with swim, bike, run, they're doing it from the time they're 7 or whatever. But like my generation, if you were coming from a run background and you tried to learn to swim, or you tried to get faster swimming, it was something that was challenging.
Yeah, I love the way USA Triathlon recruits people based on like benchmarks in both sports, because it really shows. I mean, that also shows that bike might not necessarily be the place to focus your off season, because if USA Triathlon is recruiting the next generation via swim and run, it shows that, okay, the limiters long term are probably those sports. Though, I mean, that also applies because they're looking a little more towards draft legal, so confounding variables. But the needless to say, the running is such a huge freaking opportunity. And I think that sometimes, especially in triathlon, based on what I've read, there's a little bit of a fundamental misunderstanding about how to approach these aerobic base building style periods that you might see in an off season.
Yeah.
And so I'll start with a framework that many people probably heard of, like MAF training or something similar, where you're capping around aerobic threshold. So the MAF formulation is 180 minus age, though even if you're using a very specific formula to dial in what that number actually is for your physiology, and then dialing everything beneath that all the time. And the number of times I have athletes reach out on email, just asking questions, saying, I've done all this training, I've increased my training volume, I've done all this MAF, and I'm slower. Why? What happened? And, if I had a dime for every time someone asked me that, I would probably be like living on a yacht somewhere.
And just back up slightly. What do you, when you're saying MAF, explain to us what you mean by MAF.
So MAF is, even if you're not familiar with the term for a listener, it's the idea that basically all of your training in a period of time should be easy, where you just keep it all capped under a certain bit, and that's your base building period. And it was popularized by a triathlete. Thus, I think it's a little bit more common in that world. Mark Allen back in the day. And the problem is, athletes like Mark Allen, not just elite athletes, but similar people, are not limited by their biomechanical and neuromuscular output because they're outliers to begin with. Their physiology wants to go fast. So you've put enough wood onto that fire, and it's just going to keep burning. But what about the people whose fire wants to go out in the first place, which I think is most of us? I know it's me personally. The answer is you have to constantly feed back that aerobic base, the pure aerobic base, with your maximal output and speed. And that's a place that I see a lot of triathletes that, I've been aware of, and I still lurk on the Slow Twitch forums. Sometimes
it's a dangerous place to lurk.
Oh my God. It's so amazing though. Coming from running, it's an incredible place. I love it. And compared to
kidding.
It's heaven on earth compared to the running version of the
That's very true. Yeah, that's very true. We have this conversation a lot, yeah.
Yeah, but so the idea being that as you're approaching this time, there's a few different interventions to take. The first is adding consistency and frequency. So for runners that aren't already running 5 times, or for athletes that aren't already running 5 times per week, now's the time to do it. It's going to be extremely hard to progress anywhere near your long-term potential without getting up to 5. With 6 being ideal, though, for triathletes, I think 5 with a couple cross-training days or even doubles will be helpful. 2 is volume. There's no substitute for that easy volume. Keeping it easy, these MAF style frameworks can be helpful. Just make sure you're still focusing on good form and quick strides and things like that. Like, you don't want to become a slogger as you're learning to run easy. But then the third element is the key one. And that's the maximal power output / speed, all of that. And the easiest way to do this, especially for triathletes, but for all runners, is through hill strides and strides. Most likely in this off season, a few times per week, you should be doing 4 to 6 by 20 seconds fast, usually uphill for athletes that are getting into it, maybe more flat when you're starting to think about neuromuscular adaptations later. But the idea is you're building from the ground up, but then you're also keeping the ceiling really damn high. And if you're able to do those two things at the same time, your aerobic threshold pace will go up, not just your aerobic threshold, like the raw numbers. And as that happens, like magic happens on a cellular level.
That sounds very familiar, and I think what happens for a lot of triathletes is you get caught in the murky middle, versus like spending time at that, like you say, in the base, and then doing that sort of real quality, short but sharp, high end stuff. It's very easy for people to kind of get stuck in that zone 3 murky gray area. And so I think what I'm hearing you say there is to really make it distinctive. So you've got that base building aerobic work that's very, very easy. And then you've got a few times a week, you're hitting some hill strides that are short and sharp, but kind of keeping the engine revving type thing.
Yeah, not just keeping the engine revving. Like, I think off season is the time to actually make sure you are the fastest version of yourself at that snapshot in time. That doesn't necessarily mean you need to be in 5K PR shape. It just means, like, if we're on a playground racing to the top of that hill over there and you're not able to feel confident, you're also leaving some physiological gains on the table that are really, really important. So as an athlete thinks about structuring this, I'm assuming that, they've taken a break after the season, or they're getting to a point where they're thinking about how to build their running. You start with that pure base so you can stay healthy and build, all the aerobic adaptations from like mitochondrial content to capillarization and your ability to process oxygen. That really matters. You raise that top end. You don't need to do that like extreme polarization too long, just something like 2 to 4 weeks of making sure you're ready for the next step. And then the next step is where like the true fun starts to happen, where you begin to put them together and work on, okay, I can run really fast. I'm building my endurance in my aerobic system. How can I put them together to improve my velocity at aerobic threshold and lactate threshold? And those running economy metrics are the holy grail, because, I think if you look at someone, and triathletes and cyclists and everything face this problem an extreme amount, because like a triathlete is an aerobic monster. But to access those aerobic capabilities, they have to use way more energy because their running economy isn't fully developed. So winter is the time of running economy. And that's, I think, the most fun thing, because you can have adaptations that aren't just over, okay, this is going to take me 4 months. You can do this in 2 weeks and start to see massive improvements from like dropping a minute on your 5K, even if you've not developed this before. And even if you have, if by training like a runner, you can see like pretty immediate gains that'll apply across the board.
Okay, well, you've definitely got every triathlete in the rooms is pricked up with that, with the promise of a minute off a 5K time. So talk to us about what that means then, how we improve our running economy in as little as 2 weeks, because that That sounds super appealing to me.
Yeah, it sounds like a 4-hour work week type life hack book. But I'm saying this from, for those that might not have been exposed to like the stuff that my wife Megan and I do, who's my co-coach, and she's brilliant. It's all based in like the science of it. And I think often there's a mistake thinking that the aerobic system is what drives everything. Mm-hmm. And that is true. It is over 10-year timeframes, which is really what we're thinking about on the long-term scale. But the aerobic system alone doesn't mean crap when it comes to running, at least like across athletes, because you think about like Lance Armstrong, when he was done with the tour, he went to do the New York City Marathon, and he's coached by Alberto Salazar. I'm sure he was taking every drug known to man and horse at the time. And, he ran a 2:49, great time. But when you consider that the other best aerobic athletes that have ever lived are running 2 hours, it gives perspective that, his running economy wasn't very good, even though his aerobic system was incredible. And a lot of triathletes and a lot of athletes overall can find themselves in that place. So the aerobic system does take a long time to adapt. But the things that don't take a long time to adapt are the neuromuscular system and the biomechanical systems and how they feed back within each other. And that's why running is so unique. Swimmers would probably also echo this. I can't speak to swim training too much, but I bet a lot of people that learn to swim see immediate gains very rapidly, like if they take swim lessons or something. And essentially what learning to run fast is taking run lessons. And the nervous system is what drives all of performance, not just the movements of running, the biomechanics of it, but also how the body actually puts out power in the first place. So the reason that these gains can be so quick and so of such a high magnitude is that the body is outputting power in a totally different way using the same amount of substrate. So you're not using the same amount of energy and you're feeling like you're doing the same thing, yet you're getting 2 inches more per stride or something similar. And that's how you get massive gains really, really freaking fast. And so
how do we actually achieve that? Like, what does that look like in an applied setting? So like, how do I guess what I'm saying is, how do I improve my run economy then? How do I achieve these neuromuscular and biomechanical gains?
So at the core, the aerobic system is the background pulse mixed with the high end stuff. So that's something that I think every triathlete should be doing all year round. The stuff we already talked about, those first 2 to 4 weeks. What you start to incorporate in after that is raising the actual velocity at VO2 max, or like output at VO2 max if you're going up hills and not on flats. Not because VO2 max matters, as probably most listeners know, like it's not something that's particularly going to improve after you've started training. And if it does improve, it'll level off rather quickly. It's a genetic variable largely. But your running economy, how much output you do at that effort level, can undergo pretty rapid alterations. And that is the primary place that is mediated by these neuromuscular and biomechanical factors, because you're putting out such a large quantity of power and strain on your body. So it's a great place to focus the adaptations. Two, the other big thing on velocity at VO2 max and similar is that if you're focusing on long intervals and tempos, unless an athlete is already super duper fit, they're going to be relatively inefficient. Kind of the tipping point that we've seen in all of our data, there's some interesting studies on critical power that also reflect this in cycling and other things. It's kind of 3 minutes. Under 3 minutes for intervals, athletes are usually able to maintain relatively high outputs without severe fades that aren't predicted by their aerobic system. Above that, it takes a little bit of background fitness already developed and experience. And so tempo really does play a role, things, threshold work and all that. But for runners, because it's such a activity that's based on your ability to put out power, we actually want to put out power. And so what velocity VO2 max really looks like can be super simple, is 1 or 2 workouts a week of 1 to 3 minute intervals with like anywhere from half to equal rest. And it only has to total anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes total of overall work. Actually practicing going faster and embracing that element of it rather than practicing the ability to withstand more fatigue. Because I don't care how much fatigue an athlete can withstand outside of like the very specific block before a race. I want them not to feel the freaking fatigue in the first place.
Right.
Because that makes anything possible. And that's kind of, that framework is what we've used for our pro athletes that progress long-term. But it also, I think, applies even more to people that are thinking about, okay, how do I progress like from the beginner level up to middle of the pack. I think that's where you're going to see like a minute per 5K might just be scratching the surface.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, firstly, that's all fascinating, and I think that's really, really interesting because I think triathletes do get kind of preoccupied with doing these big, longer, like long tempo runs or longer intervals, and like you say, they just lead to fatigue and not a whole lot else. Whereas those snappy kind of like 1 to 3 minute intervals, I can definitely see. Yeah, I mean, I can definitely see like how that would yield big gains without piling on a bunch of fatigue that you've already got from training 2 other sports and maybe throwing in strength sessions and life on top of that. So that sounds very smart and very economical and very just very astute to me.
Your point is fascinating, and I think it's a wonderful dichotomy to highlight the big issue here. So bike training, functional threshold power training, not my area of research expertise, but I know enough about it to understand. A good example, classic 2 by 20 minute with 5-minute recovery workout. It's a bread and butter staple. If a cyclist is motivated enough to dig themselves into dust, they could probably do that almost every week and still continue improving to a certain point as long as they're well-rounded training. That same workout for a runner would almost certainly result in stagnation almost instantaneously outside of very advanced pro athletes or very talented people. Why is that? That's super weird, right? And I think it gets back to, in biking, the machine is the thing that is actually putting out the power. So, 50 watts on a bike and 400 watts on the bike kind of look the same. It's all the same motion with small variations. I know that's oversimplifying it, but it's not that substantial. Whereas running, totally different, very similar to swimming in that regard, whereas swimmers, will often do so many 50s and 100s. But I think sometimes with running, that is underemphasized. And with that said, I don't think athletes should be on the track or anything. I think that's probably too high of an injury risk unless someone's working with a coach. All of this can be done on hills as well, where you're working on, okay, how can I actually put out more power and giving myself full recovery, basically, to be ready for the next interval, because the goal isn't to accumulate a maximum amount of fatigue throughout the workout. Actually, when athletes finishing workouts feeling pretty good, but kind of wringing the sponge fully clear when it comes to, okay, that's enough stress at that effort level to elicit adaptations. So, maybe would it help to say how a template week might look in this?
Yes. Yeah, that would be fascinating. Yeah, that'd be really interesting.
So, and this is the type of, I know this seems super simple, but I mean, the weird thing about endurance training is it is repeating something super simple with minor variations for 10 to 20 years and finding out, oh crap, I've come so freaking far. And so this general template is something that we've used for athletes from, Olympic trials runners and people that have won like the biggest ultras and trail races and mountain running championships in the world to people that are just starting out. So like Monday, uniform rest day is something we're really passionate about. We can always talk about. Tuesday would be easy with fast strides. So something like, 8 miles easy with 6 by 20 second hills. Those have full recovery, give them a minute or two run down. And on those, you're actually learning to put out power. So something like what you would race an 800 or a mile in. So you're not sprinting, you're running smoothly. Like one of those people you see on TV, you're really embodying that. Wednesday would be a workout. And all the workouts like that I'm talking about here, we're saying, okay, you want to actually focus on practicing the action of going fast. So a good example might be, with a warm up and cool down, 15 by 1 minute fast, 1 minute easy. That seems so simple and so
and I've got to say that sounds so fun too.
Oh, and
that sounds like a lot of fun compared to a lot of sessions that I used to do as a triathlete.
And the weird thing is, if I could only give one desert island workout forever, it would
you're stealing some of my questions for later in the show.
Oh, sorry.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Go on.
I contain multitudes. I'll change my idea by then. But no, the thing about the 1 minute intervals is every single athlete can, will level up with the workout. So just the other week, there's an athlete on the team who's a 2:14 marathoner who did that same workout. He tacked on 30-second hill strides after it, which is something I also like, is like 15 by 1 minute on, 1 minute easy, 5 minutes easy, 5 by 30-second hills to work on power at the end, since the 1 minute fast have a little bit more of a focus on the neuromuscular end. And also had a beginner do the same thing, and they were averaging 10-minute pace. But that was a huge breakthrough for them, and they set their 5K PR within the context of that workout. And
Wow, cool.
it's the type of thing that can be repeated constantly because we're not worried about tapping out adaptations at all because we're not thinking just about the aerobic system. And that's where the issues come in and the misconceptions, I think, sometimes about running training. It's that, when people are like, oh, well, isn't my VO2 max going to cap out? It's like, no, yes, for sure. Or isn't my lactate threshold going to cap out? It's like, probably. But I don't care about the ability to withstand fatigue if we're pushing back where the fatigue actually happens the entire time. And then later on, we start to worry about that. And, the sessions get really complicated with tempo that followed by intervals, followed by hills, all that good stuff. But at its core, it's just, how can we get that point of fatigue and raise it as high as we can? Not the raw number, not the VO2 max number, not the, millimoles per liter number on lactate threshold, but the actual output at those levels of fatigue. And the answer is you learn to run fast. It's more like dancing or something than it is like, bike or very specific effort levels that you have to hold for an extended period of time. And so that would be Wednesday. And then Wednesday could have a double, which could be another sport or a run or whatever. Thursday would be easy with optional hill strides again. Seems like a lot, right? 3 days of faster work in a row, but most of that work is still easy. Most of the running that you're doing in terms of time, so easy.
And the intervals are short, right? The work is short, so
that's
exactly.
And then Thursday can also be a double, and then Friday, easy again, which can also be a cross training day. So that would be a great time if you're just cross training to do that. If you're looking for just 5 days a week. Saturday would be a long run where we almost always include some sort of work element, whether that's a tempo at the beginning of the long run of like 20 minutes around 1 hour effort, or fartleks throughout of just 1 minute moderate every 5 minutes. And then Sunday, easy and strides again with optional cross training. And it's like, that's a lot of strides. Obviously, it's like 3 times per week in that framework. And you could also do them on Friday. But you repeat that over and over and over again. And usually what athletes find is that, oh, shoot, all of that time I was selling myself short because I couldn't access my true speed, my true power output. And by raising that ceiling and then feeding that back into the aerobic system through the easy running and the light workouts, everything gets way, way easier at the same output level. And that's what I love most as a coach, is because once an athlete's able to access that, running becomes way more fun. And that's the hard part, I think, with running, is that, especially for a lot of triathletes, is running can truly freaking suck. I didn't get into running until, it wasn't late in life, but it was late enough to remember what it felt like. And, it can be the worst sport in the world. And that's why running, I love the running economy framework, because we're not focusing on being better at withstanding the terribleness. We're focusing on making it relatively fun and transcendent, and having that correlate with, better outputs, faster paces over time.
Yeah. Running is one of those sports that's horrible until it isn't,
and it's still horrible after it is.
All right. Yeah, true. But I think, when we're in that place of you're still trying to get that consistency or that frequency, or, when you're coming, maybe after this time of year, or maybe some people in a month's time, when you're coming off of a break and you've got that kind of, you've spent longer on the couch than you have out running. And when you return to running, it just kind of feels like hard work and it feels like a slog. So getting back to that place where it feels, where you kind of bounce out the door and you get, and you just feel like you're dancing, like you say. That's cool. That's a very nice way to put it.
And I think what you're saying there is an interesting. I don't want to make sure you bring me back if I go in a bad direction or a direction that's not relevant.
Oh, there's no such thing as a bad direction. But yes,
okay. I will. What you're saying about someone that's been on the couch and then, or contrasted with someone bouncing out the door, is also relevant in this process, and how you think about. We're talking about biomechanics and neuromuscular system. That isn't purely passive. It is something that, especially triathletes, and you think about it a little bit, is form and how your body is putting out that power in a biomechanical sense. Yeah. And the problem here is there are studies that say, okay, you take a runner and you change their form and they get less economical. So you should just self-select whatever form works for you, stick with it, that's your form. And those studies suffer from, I think, a pretty clear flaw, which is, well, what happens in a year? And why do most high volume runners end up kind of looking similar, even if they started from different places? And I think the answer is that if the only way you're able to actually do the higher volume over time is kind of reinforce some of these movement patterns that might feel a little bit unnatural. So I know for me, cadence is the easy thing to pick up, but I was a natural runner at like 155, 160 cadence when I first started for years. And over time, I've been able to increase that to a more reasonable number. It's been fundamental to me. And it's not through trying to increase my cadence, it's through other form cues, mainly involving like reducing my ground contact time and shortening the lever as my knee pulls through, little things like that. But making sure we're not doing all of this with bad form and slogging a little bit, because then you're not going to be able to like truly access the gains you can make. Plus, you're going to open your body up to more injuries.
Right. So cadence is something I was going to come to. So, but we're here, we've arrived. So let's talk about it. Because I know, a lot of people talk about 180 or, around the magic 180 number. But the question being, and I mean, I think I know my answer, and I think I know the answer, but like if you don't naturally run at 180 or 175, whatever, does it do you more harm than good to go chase that? Or is it better? Is it smarter? Is it more intelligent to work on the form and let the cadence follow as a consequence of good form? Will your cadence come up when you start improving your form? And then kind of part B to that question is, how do you improve the form? So yeah, there's quite a lot I just threw at you there, but
that's amazing. Yeah, and never chase a number. Like I think those numbers, one, are derived from racers on the track in the Olympics. The numbers themselves are not particularly relevant, but what is relevant, I think, is the overall principle that quick, light strides are what will help you unleash your true speed and not get injured. And how you achieve that number, like it does involve some amount of like making sure that you're actually turning over a bit faster. But what that turnover number ends up being could be anywhere from like, 160 to 190. And as long as it for you is like reinforces the low ground contact time and efficient power output, it's totally fine. And so the big form, this is going to sound like to maybe especially to those that have never dealt with my crap before, is you prance like a show pony. And what
I like it.
Yeah, what I mean by that, so the actual form cue that a biomechanics specialist would say is that you practice high heel recovery. So after your foot leaves the ground, your heel elevates so that the lever formed by your femur and your tibia is kind of narrow. You can think about it, the example that's always used in physics class of the figure skater that spins around when their legs are closer, or when their arms are closer, they spin around faster. And then when their arms are farther out, they spin around slower. That's very similar to the way we're thinking about energy generation and running. So it's a passive process. So you're not doing a butt kick by engaging your hamstring. You're letting that knee bend. You're not keeping a straight leg pull through. And that's the big thing, that if you look at pro runners, they're all doing that, every single one. For the most part, there are some like notable outliers, but almost all are doing it. And that's what our brains are encoding most of the time as cadence in good form, because it follows naturally. And, I actually think a good drill for people is just to walk and try it. It feels terrible walking, but it gives you an idea of what it's like, which is, usually we walk with relatively straight legs. Instead, after your leg leaves the ground, focus on bending your knee and pulling your knee forward. Others might call it knee drive, but knee drive never worked for me in terms of the cue. And combining that basic form guidance with the idea that your arms stay relatively loose and relatively high. You don't want your hands dropping to your hips. That's not like, you also don't want to be a T-Rex, though our coaching mascot is a T-Rex for that reason. And a very slight forward lean, though not forward at the waist, you're just keeping your forward momentum going forward. You combine, and then you just loosen up your whole body as much as you possibly can in the process of that. You combine all those cues, and usually you'll find the cadence that works for you. But I can't emphasize enough, for people that have never tried it, the high heel recovery, particularly when you're going fast, can make a pretty big difference on your levels of fatigue based on what we've found. We've done some like backyard testing with athletes that has been that have struggled with this sort of thing, and it's been pretty relatively stunning, including on athletes that are not subject to like the placebo effect or anything.
Mhm.
We're measuring actual like values and outputs, like blood pricks and things.
And so is this a time of year when you would set drills specifically within a session for your runners, or triathletes kind of who are keen to improve their form? Like a lot of triathletes can get almost preoccupied, I think, with, oh, I need to improve my run form, or, oh, I look terrible in race photos. I need my run form needs to improve. Is it something that you would target specifically, or are you more of an advocate of run form comes with running?
Well, if anyone looks good in racing, I need to know their secrets, because I still have not achieved that.
No.
Yeah, no, I mean, for me, the best drill. So you know these general principles, and then the best drill on top of that is hill strides and strides.
Okay.
That is like a real world process of putting out power. We also have athletes do high knees before they run. Just as a little neuromuscular cue. Gets their feet going, popping off the ground a little bit. Nothing substantial. You can look up, if you're curious, you can look up Wake Up Legs online with my name, and find that routine. But we limit, and then leg swings and things, which are just mobility exercises. We limit anything that involves non-running stresses that look kind of like running but aren't running, because the risk of doing those unsupervised greatly outweighs the benefits. And what we've seen is if an athlete can put out pretty great sustainable power up a hill for 30 seconds and practice these things, they're going to fall into what works for their specific physiology and morphology, because though we are all Homo sapiens, we have very different bodies, not just in terms of like the obvious things that we might be able to see, but also if we measured very specifically like what the exact proportions of bones and things were. And that's why universal principles really only apply to the motion, not like the motion generally, not the like specific ways that an individual might do it. So I always tell athletes, don't think about your form too much. Just make sure you're not making any of the most obvious mistakes. But if you're anything like me, all the obvious mistakes are my natural setting, because I didn't like grow up doing this. And
like a lot of people, though, to be honest, like that is a lot of people. A lot of people didn't grow up. People adults who find themselves in triathlon now didn't grow up learning, doing run trail. Oh, some of course did, but not everybody learned how to run perfectly on a track, or had run form cues and drills and things like that. So I think this is a very real, applied real world setting that we're talking about, that a lot of people can identify with, for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I think, that especially as you're building volume, this becomes extra important. So I think sometimes if you're just doing a little bit of running, it doesn't matter that much, and you're not going to self-optimize. As you increase volume, I actually think the science of self-optimization is a little bit weak, because it's also contrasted by the whole idea of gait retraining. So there's great studies out there that if you're just on a treadmill and you're getting gait retraining cues that have force measures hooked up to your tibia and tell you how to reduce force output through your tibia due to like injury risk or just form because you want to run with light strides. Those adaptations that an athlete's able to do right on the treadmill stick around for a year. And they're able to reduce total loading by like 40 to 60%. So, I mean, that just shows that, yeah, some of us, if you're anything like me, are doing things that are probably not super productive. And as you increase volume, that becomes especially important. And it's one reason that like run doubles, I think, can be helpful for people in very small moderation. It's because at a certain point, if you're just running and you're like, I can't do this, you're going to kind of figure out what I mean by prancy pony. As weird as that sounds.
Yep. Well, let's pivot a little bit and talk about a place that I know you like, which is running on trails. Because a lot of triathletes, especially at this time of year and with the seasons changing and having been on the treadmill, the track, or on the road a lot, this time of year, a lot of people tend to head off road. And I know that's kind of like your favorite playground. So maybe give us a few pointers for people who are heading to the trails for the first time, or maybe a little bit apprehensive about, where should I run? What should I be doing? Is it okay to just completely switch tack and run trails? Like, I'm interested in your vantage point on this.
Well, first, heck yeah. So proud of you for making the
Yeah.
trail transition. But also, if we're thinking about a pure fitness framework, trails are freaking awesome. As long as you're doing the faster work and like doing them on non-technical trails when you do that specific stuff, everything else just improves all around performance capabilities. And the first element there that I think is really important you mentioned is you said it was play like my playground. I think for everyone, remembering the play element. Trails are really good
Yes.
at
Yes. Yes.
giving us that feedback, right? Because if you take yourself too seriously on trails, you get screwed over pretty darn quickly when you like eat
Yeah.
crap. Whereas on roads and tracks in particular, it becomes a brutal game of self-judgment often. And interlocked with that, the relationship with the watch absolutely changes. Time
Yes.
matters.
So true. Yeah.
Time matters, but don't like ever worry about pace. I mean, um, I did a big race a couple weeks ago where I averaged 10-minute pace,
Hmm.
and was extremely proud of it.
Hmm.
And it's not to denigrate 10-minute pace. It's just like not, if I was worried about what the watch said at all, I don't even, we encourage none of our athletes to have pace on their watch face whatsoever.
Hmm.
Not just trail athletes, also road and track athletes, as weird as that sounds. And then the second two things, otherwise, it's basically trail running is road running. Just all the studies basically indicate that level ground running economy, uphill running economy, and downhill running economy all correlate. There's just a couple variations. One is that there is on downhill more impact forces and different biomechanical loading patterns. So you're going to get more eccentric muscle contractions. It can be a little weird at first. Trust your body. Understand that you're going to get a little sore the first few times you do it,
Yes.
and be okay with that. And then on uphills, there's more mechanical work done at the joints and in some of the muscles. So muscular endurance becomes a slightly bigger factor. But otherwise, all of the skills you have, particularly from biking, will really apply. Running, obviously, and your aerobic system really comes in handy from swimming and other things. So I think triathletes are born trail runners. In fact, I'm coaching a triathlete right now. I don't know if it's public, but a very good, very, very, very elite triathlete who's coming over to trails and is like going to take over the world. Like, as weird as that sounds, he's so good at trail running. And I'm like, oh, well, that makes sense. Triathletes are freaking incredible athletes. And,
Yeah.
trail running really awards athleticism rather than like metronomic repetition. And so I think every triathlete has pretty much unlimited potential on trails and in ultras and things like that. So, if you're listening to this and you're on the fence, make the leap, give it a try. It also feeds back into your mid-season training later on in a way that I think can be super fun and really productive, even if your goal is just like qualifying for Kona in 10 years or something. Like it can feed back in better than doing the track sessions and all of that stuff in terms of how your physiology adapts long term.
Yeah, and I think from a physical and mental standpoint, like training, trail running, for a triathlete, definitely like the strength gains that the specific strength gains that you get from running uphill, and just running on trails that could be all kinds of varied terrain. Could be rocky, could be muddy, could be snowy, could be whatever. I think the physical gains that you get from that are one thing, but I think for me personally, and I know a lot of triathletes like this, especially in the off season, like the mental change of pace and not just change of pace. I mean, like the change of environment, and you're no longer on the track looking at splits, and you're no longer got your head in the watch. You've got it's a completely different, just a completely different landscape in a very literal and figurative sense, which I think at this time of year is so important when you are looking to kind of refresh and reboot and reset a little bit before throwing yourself into another season. So I mean, I'm a complete, you're preaching to the converted, because I would always run on trails over road or anything else now. But back in the day when I was training as a full-time triathlete, I don't think I ever ran on trails unless I got lost somewhere.
Well, I mean, one, you're a total freaking beast, but two, there's no bad way to do it. I would just say, make sure it's still fun. I know that's a weird thing to say when we're talking about like performance and stuff, but I think it's really easy to lose sight of it, where we start to treat ourselves like we are means to an end, whether that end is Kona qualifying or just getting fitter. Whereas like the process is where life is lived. And I always want to like say, if someone enjoys roads more, great, but make sure you actually enjoy it. This sport or any sport has no inherent value in a really good way, in a liberating way, in a way that applies to basically everything we do in life. But I think sometimes we can get so far into it that we lose sight of the fact that, like, oh, we are just kind of monkeys farting around. And yet trails, I think trails are the best for that, because, like, we all go through our cycles, but eventually you're just like, oh yeah, farting around. I'm right on.
I am still a monkey. Yeah. If aliens came down to Earth, they'd be like, what are you doing?
Yeah. Or maybe the aliens are all runners. Maybe every civilization that achieves a certain level of hyper intelligence ends up being like, I need to run out this anxiety. Goes around.
Well, yeah, there's definitely a lot of that. Yeah, but a random podcast tangent. There's always one every show. But don't you think? I think the weirdest thing, not the weirdest, but from a triathlete point of view, the weirdest thing that aliens would swimming up and down in a 25-yard pool for like 90 minutes. If aliens just came down and looked at us, it would be like, what are you doing? Why are you going up and down and up and down and up and down? At least with trails, like, there would be a little bit more, oh, they're going on an adventure. They're going to they're going to check out a new trail, but swimming up and down in 25-yard pool, yeah, that's one. Every time, I do that most days. So, I'm holding my hands up here, but
I think the arrow position on the bike would be the one that really gets them. Like, they'd be like, that's your decision? We understand your biomechanics. From all the probes we've done, we understand how your bodies are shaped. I don't know if that's normal.
It's not.
But that being said, as a non-swimmer, I imagine, I'm just guessing, that it is meditative.
It is, yeah.
Sure. You're doing something extremely productive for your physiology, but then also you understand that, like, I imagine it's easier to achieve flow in swimming than it may be in other things, perhaps. I don't know.
Sure. No, you're right. It definitely is, and I am completely an advocate of that. But and the pool is my place where I go to switch off and have that, like, almost metronome effect. You can zone out. I think it's something to do with that you can get in with your breath much easier than anything else, or I don't know. But so that was quite a random tangent. We've covered aliens and we've covered breathing. We've covered 25-yard pools. So
probes. Don't forget probes.
I like it. Injuries.
Yeah.
Womp womp. Nobody likes injuries. But they are definitely part of running. And as triathletes, I think most triathletes would agree that of the three sports, running is the one that often leads them to the injury chair. How do you help your runners and how do you help your athletes stay injury-free? What does that look like?
So I learned over time to frame it in a different way, because I think, one, injury is not sexy. And I've learned that from, like, what I've seen of, like, page views and things and podcast listens. You talk about injury and it's like anything else that we talk about. It's because, like, on our podcast, we're, like, extremely open about everything. And it's like people are all in. It's not about, like, athletics at all most of the time. But injuries, one place where people will skip. I think that applies because, one, we all just think it's a little bit inevitable. And two, it's kind of a bummer. But I think injuries are extremely important to think about in the context of adaptation. So essentially what an injury is a failure in adaptation for whatever reason. And that is not just bad if it leads to injury. Sometimes it leads to injury. Often it doesn't. It just leads to stagnation or regression that we're not even seeing in the moment. And so injury and adaptation are parts of the same spectrum. If you fall away on the injury side, that sucks. But if you're also kind of in the middle and not adapting, that also sucks. And that way, that's why when we're talking about to our athletes, we are focused constantly on how can we improve adaptation rates. And so there's a few things we focus on, and this also applies obviously to injuries. The first is basic strength work. So if you're curious online, we on Trail Runner Mag, we have the 8-minute speed legs routine. We also have a weekly template of strength work that involves bands and things like that. Essentially, all this stuff that we do involves at most 10 minutes a week spread out.
Oh, wow. Okay.
For mobility work. That's all it really takes in our experience. And we have incredible amounts of data at this point. But keeping that consistent rather than, like, we have found that heavy lifting, great if a person works with the strength coach year round, terrible if they're on and off with it. Because every time you go through that inflammation cycle, you're increasing injury risk. And so understand your goals. You don't necessarily have to be Christian Blumenfeld or whoever might be doing incredible amounts of strength work. I'm not exactly sure what his training program is, because he's doing it in such a single-minded, focused 35-hour-in-a-week way that it totally plays into his physiology differently. So a few minutes a day, very simple activities. People could look those up. 2 is nutrition. And approach that, like, we're all about eat enough food, always do not restrict, fuel your training, especially in the moment. I mean, the studies on particularly endocrine system and nervous system impacts of underfueling longer training sessions, pretty darn terrible. And I'm not sure how much like low carb, high fat has made its way into the tri world. I assume a little bit.
It's here. Yeah.
And that there are some men that may have some success with that.
Yes.
They are most likely physiological outliers. There are probably 0 women that will be reaching their potential doing that. And it's really important to understand, because even the women aren't reaching their potential because the way the hormone system works is obviously very different. Also, women are often pretty much optimizing some of their fat oxidation just naturally due to the role of estrogen and things. Whereas, men have testosterone as kind of a buffer, but also have the sex hormone impacts and also have the cortisol impacts. It's just a question of whether those impacts can be weathered. And so a lot of the people that have success end up being freaks of nature that happen to be really great at adapting to this stuff. Whereas if you've had a low testosterone reading as a male athlete, consider how you're fueling your training. And then overall, like making sure you're eating enough and plenty of protein and all that good stuff. And then just focusing on overall life stress. So the body doesn't know miles. It doesn't know weekly volume. It doesn't know any of that stuff. At the cellular level, it is meaningless to a cell. All the cell knows is stress signals, the chemical context of those. And so training is introducing a very helpful chemical context that can be overwhelmed by the same chemical context coming from life. Here we're also talking about stress hormones, but also just even good hormonal stimuli and good nervous system stimuli. And so making sure you actually feel good in training. If you feel bad all the time, if you are tired, your body is going to be undershooting adaptation. The problem for tri in particular, but also ultra running, also road marathoning, even track running, is that the champions are genetically predisposed to be able to manage stress levels. Like that is why they are champions. They would not be that way. It might not be their VO2 max. They might just be a freak of nature when it comes to the way cortisol interacts with their physiology or whatever it is.
Right. Yep.
And so understanding that your specific context can be totally different and you can still reach that very, very top level for yourself and for the world. Example I always love is there's an athlete we coach. So UTMB, one of the biggest ultras in the world, probably might be the most competitive, off of 45 miles a week and no cross training, finished 3rd at UTMB. Whereas all of his competitors—
45 miles a week?
Yeah. And
holy cow. Sorry, you made my voice go really high then.
Yeah, and it's just the way stress interacts with his particular physiology, also an outlier physiology, is different. And all of us are working within that same context. And so being hyper aware that the goal— it's good to feel good in running in life. And actually in our podcast, we did a Science Corner episode that was on this all the studies in physiology of why that is. My wife's a doctor, so she's the actually one that knows all this stuff. And, it's what we've seen most over time, because you can pound yourself into 2 months of adaptation, but over 2 years, it's so key to give your body the healthy context to improve in a way that isn't just sustainable, is actually achievable at all.
Right. Yeah. So I'm fascinated now with your guy that did the UTMB off of 45 miles a week. How did you, so to back that up, how did you find out in the first place that like a lower mileage like that would yield that kind of end result? Is it just somebody that has a lot of life stress outside of training?
Well, I'd love to say that I'm a freaking prophet over here and knew it was going to happen.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're going to have everybody knocking on your door.
Well, yeah, you'd be surprised. Which obviously I think coaches are given too much credit in all of this world. Like, it's individual athletes, their toughness, their belief, their genetics often. This guy is a total freaking monster, emotionally, mentally. Like, he's also a great person. You know what I mean? Like, I think a random number generator could coach most people, as long as they are a loving random number generator.
Yes.
Of course, that was me. That was my imposter syndrome talking for. But no, we use a specific metric called fatigue resistance that it's like we've created. It's a mix of a few different things. Essentially, it's how athlete performance outputs deteriorate after longer sessions when they then go to threshold or above. And we have a specific way we calculate it that's not that important, but he tested relatively off the charts within the first few months. And once an athlete does that, we don't push training too hard at all because they're already at the place they need to be. And we make sure that that number is improving before we do that. So combining that with life stress for him, like put him in a place where, he was able to do that. Who's to say though, that maybe if he did 145 miles a week, he would have won. It's just, that's the hard part about training theory. It's always, you can't prove a negative and we're all n equals 1, but you add up enough of those. And I think sometimes the stories that are so elevated for like demonstrating hard work ethic are actually demonstrating genetic anomalies. And I'm much more curious in where the middle of the bell curve lies, because I think that that's much more applicable even to the most pros, let alone most beginners or anything like that.
Yeah, this is fascinating. I could talk about this all day, but yeah. So last question then, before we bid you farewell. But you already mentioned your favorite, your go-to run workout, your desert island run workout. What would, or maybe a run workout for this time of year, or maybe it's just your all-around, all-time favorite run workout. But let's sign off with your go-to run sesh.
Perfect. So 2 or 3 miles, easy warm up, working into it. It's okay to go slow, focus on all those things we talked about. Then 6 by 2 minute hills, moderately hard, thinking like you're running a 5K, but not digging down too deep in the heart rate or any specifics of the output itself, running back down for recovery, and then capping it off with 4 by 45-second hills hard, where you're not sprinting, but you're putting out a good amount of power, really stressing your cardiac system, and finishing that with 2 or 3 miles easy cool down. For pro athletes, there might be tempo running tacked on top of that for some aerobic benefits. There might be a few more intervals tacked on if we need a ton of stress for them to adapt for whatever reason, if they measure on some of these metrics in a different place. But for most people, that will be the ultimate power at VO2 max session, where you're working on how much output can actually come from those, muscles at the joints over the course of, the aerobic, but as hard as it gets aerobically, output levels. And then the running down recovery gives you time to fully recover for the next one. So we're not working on just practicing fatigue. We're working on actually putting out the power. And then you throw the hills on, and as simple as that session sounds, you'll be running through sludge. You'll be very excited when it's over. And there's a really good chance that just a few days later, you find that I have a little bit more snap. And it all gets back to how the neuromuscular system works, that once you're able to push that limit, and this workout truly does start to push that limit, as weird as it sounds, the limit gets pushed back just slightly. And doing it on hills reduces injury risk, and I think really optimizes the amount of power an athlete can put out in a session without fading. And that's where really cool things can happen.
When really cool things happen. Well, I like it. David, thank you so much for your time. This has been fascinating. I have thoroughly enjoyed chatting with you, and I know this is going to be of great insight and interest to our listeners. So thank you for your expertise and insight. And I think we'll be coming back to you in the future on Triathlete for tapping up your running brains some more. So,
I'm always here. And for any listener out there, I talked a lot about training, but I just want to know you are enough and you are loved no matter what you do with training, no matter what you do with life. Always just want to make sure that message is loud and clear, that you are so amazing just the way you are. And in this process of striving for self-improvement, that still means that every single day along the way, you're freaking perfect.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's a lovely sign off. Thank you.
Woohoo! Thank you so much.
Cheers, David. Bye.
Bye.
The Velocity Cycling app knows that all of your training inside is to be better outside. Becoming faster is a skill you can and should be training during your indoor sessions by focusing on key contributors to speed like body position, effective power transfer, gearing efficiency, and drag reduction. With Velocity, better starts inside so you can get to fast faster. Next up, we're joined by Chris Foster, our executive editor and resident gear guru, who's going to talk us through some of the biggest trends we've seen in the running world over the last few years and the impact this has had on gear and gadgets. Here's our chat with Chris. Chris Foster, the gear guru, is in the house. How are you doing, Chris?
I'm good, EK. How are you?
I'm pretty good, thank you. We had first snow in Boulder last night, so I'm all wrapped up in my woolies.
Oh my gosh. We got under 70 degrees here in LA, so I'm sitting next to a heater. That's how hard it is here.
You Californians. Stop talking to me. Well, no, actually, we're going to do quite the opposite, of course, because we've got you here to talk run gear. And I know you normally wow us every month on Fitter and Faster with all your gear and gadget knowledge, but I think with the run special here, you might just outdo yourself. No pressure. I mean, I don't want to.
Jeez, I didn't have anything planned. I was just gonna talk about like going outside and stuff. Yeah, right. That's all I got. Yeah. No, running is definitely nearest and dearest to my heart. It's probably the thing I do the most right now. And it's I have a background in running too. But yeah, there's a lot going on in running with running gear, which kind of makes it exciting because there is a lot to talk about, and it's not as like straightforward as I think everyone would have you believe.
Right.
So yeah, no, there's a lot to cover, but I'll try to be brief.
Yeah, no, don't be brief. We don't want you to skimp and save, but I think when it comes to gear for triathlon, obviously it's very easy to think all about the bike and all the carbon fiber goodness and magic that comes with cycling, and a lot of people are often like, oh, I can just toss a pair of run shoes in my bag and I'm good to go. But when it comes to run shoes, as you've just mentioned, like there's obviously been a lot of big changes in run shoe technology over the last few years, and obviously, like when it comes to like the maximalist shoes, I know that's something you've got a lot of opinions about. So maybe we start there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people love to talk about the bike stuff, but I think that's just because it's it's sleek and it's expensive, but a lot of the bike stuff isn't going to get you injured if you have the wrong one. I mean, if your fit's off, obviously, but you get the wrong pair of wheels, it's not going to injure you. But with running, it can cause injury pretty quickly, especially with the shoes. So yeah, the maximalist shoes are like the big thing over the past, 5-10 years, kind of starting with like Hoka's Bondi. That was kind of like the big catalyst, I think. And there were other brands that did it too, but I think it really blew up with Hoka. And I think even Hoka will admit to this. A lot of that had to do with triathletes.
Right.
Like, Hoka was made by triathletes. Like
100%. Yeah.
And they've hit it big, in the general running community. Yeah. I know in the ultra world, they're huge. But, triathletes are often willing to try stuff first.
Yes, we are the early adopters.
Yeah. And quite honestly, like they're willing to look a little bit dorky while they do it. So I think the big stack Hokas, like we're just like, yeah, whatever. They look like orthopedic shoes. Don't care. They feel good.
Do you remember when they first came out? Like that, how funny they looked. They used to make me chuckle all the time. I was like, wow, why are people wearing moon boots?
Yeah, now everyone's got it. And in fact, I mean, we'll talk about this in a minute, but it's almost like a signal. Like, oh, you're a triathlete or you're serious about running, you've got a high stack shoe, or like we'll get into in a minute, carbon soled shoes. It's kind of like a marker. But yeah, so after Hoka kind of took off, other brands hopped in line. You see it in every brand has their squishy model. And they're good shoes. And I think there's two kind of big reasons that they're good. The first is kind of obvious and the second is less so. Obviously more cushion takes the impact off your knees and your joints. I mean, for older runners, for people who've been running a long time, for triathletes who are doing a lot of training, they're coming off the bike, their legs are already fatigued. This is just, one of those basic things. Like you can feel it in the shoe store. You put them on, you run around, they squish, they feel nice. Especially if you're a heel striker, for instance.
Right.
But the second is kind of less obvious, a little less intuitive. It's that this increased cushioning, and I think this was kind of more of an accident. I think this kind of came after the fact. This increased cushioning kind of allows your foot and your gait to do more of what it already does.
Right.
I think that's kind of goes against what we were looking at in like the 90s and the early 2000s. like the old school way of, well, not old school, but like mid school, was like, if your foot rolls inward, we need to fix it. If it rolls outward, we need to not necessarily fix it, but give it a little more room to move. Like any alteration in gait from neutral is a problem.
Yep.
And we have to take care of that by correcting. It's almost like the Victorian style of running gait, correction. Like
putting your foot in a corset type thing.
Exactly. It must be corrected. That was a horrible British accent. Sorry. But that was the thing, it's like, there's a problem. And it, to some extent it worked. And it was an easy thing, I think, for people to do in a shoe store. You do the shoe dog thing at Road Runner Sports. You run on the treadmill, or someone watches you walk, and you're like, okay, well, these are custom for me, and there's nothing wrong with that. But now they're saying, let your foot, let your gait do what it wants to do, unless there's a problem, unless it's causing injury. So they're not just saying it's a free for all. Like, I think what we were seeing a little bit with the minimalist stuff before, where it's just like, we're humans, we're supposed to run without shoes on, let the foot just go wild. And if you get injured, that's your problem.
More like when you get injured versus if.
Right, exactly. Because we, as much as, there are people who ran barefoot for, generations and stuff like that, that ain't us anymore. I didn't grow up running barefoot. I'm sure you probably didn't either.
Nope.
Yeah. So we grow up with shoes on, and, for better or for worse, you could say it's a bad thing, but here we are. So anyway, now they're saying, let the foot roam a little bit more. And I think the higher cushion shoes, the maximalist shoes, are allowing your foot to do that without, that minimalist, like without any structure at all. Like, so I think that's kind of like the secondary thing that we're seeing with the maximalist shoes. We're seeing less injuries, and people are thinking, oh, I'm not getting injured because it's squishy and it's taking impact off my joints and my bones and stuff like that. It is to some extent. Yeah. But it's also letting your foot
do what it wants to do. Yeah.
It's working with your natural gait. And, again, that doesn't work for everyone. There are times when you need to have corrections, but I think that's kind of an interesting thing we're seeing with these maximalist shoes. It's having this weird, almost unintended effect that is decreasing injury.
That's very interesting. I hadn't thought about that second point there before. But then there are some downsides to these shoes too.
Nothing's perfect. First, there is less structure. And that's kind of the point. It's just like, we're taking away these, think back to the most structured shoes. I think of like a New Balance, like 1000 series with like that big plastic, insert on the inside, and that's providing that motion control. But if you have none of that, you're getting this compression all the time, just pure compression into the foam, that can make the shoe change over time, probably quicker than it would normally, because it is so plush, and you're not bottoming it out, but you can get to that faster. So if you do have an imbalance, it can almost get exaggerated quicker than it would without, a plush pair of shoes. And so in that sense, sometimes you need to replace them faster than you'd hope. And unfortunately, you don't know you need to